Hi. So this week we're reading Parashat Tazria, and in general, Tazria, not in general, but a lot of times Tazria and Metzorah do come as a unit. This year they do not, but they are very connected, not only practically but also thematically. So in this week and in next week's Parashiot, we're going to be talking about Tuma and Tara, which are two things that we generally are very quick to define, but in reality, I think are much more complex state of being than we really I don't want to say give them credit for, but that we really digest and appreciate ourselves. So we generally will say, Tuma is impure and Tara is pure, which in itself is a little problematic because that those words are defined by their negations, So we also will sometimes associate Tum'ah with something bad or sin, which yes, that is sometimes the case, but not always. And Tara being a redeeming factor. And again, sometimes this is more true, but not always the case. Tara is not always bad. It sometimes is just a state of being, which we'll talk about more as we continue. And I think something very difficult, or especially difficult to really digest in this case is the first case and the first of psukim in this parasha, which talk about a yoledet, or a woman who gave birth. And the parasha is mostly about someone who has sarat, a metzorah, right? Which also is it leprosy? Is it other kinds of skin diseases? It's commonly defined as leprosy, but a lot of hachamim too say it was some sort of other disease. But today I really want to focus on the woman who gave birth, and I want to really focus on some ideas in terms of why is this woman who gave birth, this yoledet, why is she linked together with the metzorah? What is connected to that? What does a woman who gave birth have to do with someone who has this skin, this physical, this ailment, spiritual, ailment manifested physically, essentially? And what does that show us about how we should relate to a postpartum woman? And what does that show also in how she should relate to herself? So we see, I want to go back to the definitions a second of Tuma and Tara. Again, we misinterpret, or it's a little bit unclear, but we see that the most, I think, the most telling way to understand or define Tuma is how the Torah does, and the psukim. And the psukim, the Torah calls a dead person, right, a met, that is the avi avot Tuma. That is the prototypical or almost ideal Tuma, the most quintessential Tuma is a dead person. So if someone, so because that's how it's defined, we see that on some level, all Tuma is associated with some level of death, or a brush with death, or connection with death, or something to that effect. So now, that makes our question about the yoledet, about the mother, even more, in a way, stronger, because why is she being associated with death? She is literally doing the opposite of death, right? She is bringing life into this world. So she's literally the closest a person could be to partnering with God in creating. She's creating and bringing life into this world. Why is that associated with Tumah? Why is that associated with death? So let's talk for a second about the process of pregnancy and birth for a minute. Obviously I'm not a doctor. I'm not talking about this, I'm saying more thematically and ideas instead of, I know I'm not talking about physically. So I also want to look at the psukim, what starts with ki isha ki tazria ve'yalda, which is a very odd phrase. It means a woman who conceives and has a child and gives birth and births a child. But literally, you could even say a woman, a tazria comes from the word zera, plant a seed. So literally, a woman who was implanted or planted a seed and has a child. So very odd phraseology. Number one, isn't it obvious that a woman who gives birth conceived? Like, isn't that just right? Basic, simple biology. You can't give birth if you haven't conceived first, conceive that child. So number one, that's, seems redundant or unnecessary. And even if you want to say she conceived and had a child, why would you use the word tazria? Why can't you use the word harta, right? That's other words they use in the Torah. that Batahar, right? She got pregnant. So why specifically this Tazria that associated with plants, with seeds? So I think we could look at the answer to that as I know I'm posing a lot of questions. Hopefully we'll tie them all in as we continue, but I wanted to just get everything out, hopefully. So a seed is potential for something greater, right? When you have a seed in your hand, right, and it is nothing, you're not going to eat it, right? I mean, you can't eat some seeds, obviously. We're saying a seed in general, it's one thing, but when you plant that seed and you cultivate that seed, you have a tree and much more fruit, right? So similar here, that when a woman conceives, there's potential for a child, right? There's this fetus, this potential for a child. However, unfortunately, that doesn't always come to fruition, unfortunately, right? Many pregnancies, I think the latest statistic I saw was 1 in 4 pregnancies, not women, pregnancies end in miscarriage, which is a very high number, showing just PSA, be sensitive to what you say. You don't know what people are going through or have gone through, and sadly, not only miscarriages, but sadly, I didn't look up the percentage of stillbirths, but sadly that also happens, unfortunately. And until recent times, right, we sort of don't process it so much, because in recent times, giving birth, thankfully, is a generally okay situation for for mother and child. Generally, when you hear someone, God forbid, had a bad situation, it's more of the anomaly than the norm in our days. But a few generations back, not even that long ago, the norm was not the norm, but it was very, very likely that a child or mother would not make it through childbirth, right? And that was very common for a lot of history. Childbirth was the most dangerous thing a woman could do, right? She was risking her life to have a child. And again, thankfully to modern medicine and advancements, that's not the case now. And it happens significantly much, much, much less. But we do have to realize the level of danger and of risk that the woman and child are going through in this, pregnancy and birth process. We don't necessarily think about that so much because it's uncomfortable to think about. And thank God, most of the time we don't need to think about that. But it is something that, especially in the reality of the Tanakh, was something very, very clear and obvious to them, right? When this woman conceives, when a woman or whatever, right, she's planting this potential for this life to be born. But this whole time, she sort of lies in the balance between life and death. Will this baby make it? Will there be a healthy birth? Please God, right? And also, will the mother make it, right? Will both of these, mother and baby, make it through to the other side successfully? And yes, birth is amazing and miraculous and life-giving, but at the same time, it is dangerous and scary, right? And I think a woman in labor, during the labor, is faced with not only the mortality and the fragility of her child, of her newborn baby, that's coming, but also her own, right? Mother and baby are literally hanging in the balance between life and death during this process. Sometimes more obviously than others, right? Sometimes more, births are more smooth than others, and sometimes they're, more scary than others. But I think it's the time in a woman's life where she is really the closest, on that balance of her mortality and her godliness, right? She's seeing, right, that, oh my God, I have this potential, that I'm creating this life and I'm so close to God, but also I don't know if what's gonna happen, right? There's such a risk here. And each birth is so unique, and each process brings up so much for that specific woman. And I just want to say, as someone who gave birth, thank God, I think you really feel this dichotomy. On the one hand, it was, I'm speaking from my experience, but I don't think I'm alone. But on the one hand, it is a painful, scary, humbling experience. But on the other hand, it was one of the, this a very empowering and liberating experience where I've never felt more connected to God. Like you have this feeling of like, oh my God, this is really, this child is something that my body nurtured and created for the past 9 months. It's a really crazy thought when you think about it. And this dichotomy, I think, of fragility and fear and vulnerability and our mortality, and on the other hand, being grateful and blessed and feeling this creative, godly energy, I don't think that, first of all, I don't think that's only unique to a mother. I think it's also to, to a father, but I think also it doesn't stop once you have that baby in your arms, right? It continues, I think, for most, if not all parents throughout parenthood, right? I can't imagine I'm the only one when my kids were newborns that you go in and you just peek on them when they're sleeping and make sure they're breathing, right? You have this need to constantly be checking on them, making sure they're okay. And when they get older, oh, make sure you let me know that you get to so and so's house, and let me know when you get there and that you got there safely. And you always have this as a parent, you're always worrying about your child on some level, for better or worse. And I'm just going to take a little aside for a minute because I can't not mention this, but unfortunately over the past few days, or I don't even know how long it's been now, but sadly many people have not been able to get to where they need to go safely, and there have been many terror attacks in the past few days all over Israel, and it's really just horrible, and we pray that this will end, please God, soon. And yeah, I just couldn't not mention that when it's really going on, really, unfortunately, way too much. So back to this, we unfortunately see, because of this, I think, I'm saying on a psychological level, I think because of this balance between, life and death, mortality and godliness and all that, we unfortunately find that a lot of women carry a lot of trauma around birth and their birth experience, what they went through, or even women have something, some women have something called tocophobia, which is a woman who has extreme fear of pregnancy and birth, to the point where sometimes even if they want a child, they will be so afraid that they will not allow themselves to get pregnant and have that child that they so badly want because of their fears. So this is something that is very real and very common, unfortunately, even though we don't always talk about it. And the fact that of the emotional toll that birth takes on a woman is seen by the fact that 70%, which is a huge percentage of women, will experience something called baby blues after they give birth. And this is a general feeling of sadness and anxiety 2 to 4 weeks post-birth. And for most women, this will subside and they'll go back to, their normal, the more normal temperament. But for a good 10 to 20%, that, I read different statistics, but for 10 to 20%, this will stick and become other mental health disorders, such as postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. And these are things that unfortunately 10 to 20% of women will encounter. There actually are studies that also fathers encounter this on a lower level, but they do, this is common that some fathers will also encounter this anxiety or depression post having a new child. So this is definitely something that we have to be aware of. And birth is an extreme, intense physical and emotional experience for a woman. Okay, so let's bring this all back to the parasha, right? To the theme, to the Tuma and Tara, and the connection to Mitzorah. And I want to do that by first addressing the question we mentioned a little bit before, is why does a woman post-birth, why she has to go through a Tara process, right? She's Tame'ah, we said, and now she has to, so, which I think is because of this life and death balance that she's playing with, almost, so to speak, in the birthing process. But why does she bring a korban chatat, right? Why is she bringing a sin offering? What sin did she do, right? What did she do, right? She didn't do anything wrong. She brought life into the world. What sin? So there are many different takes on this, many different interpretations of this. I'm not going to talk about every single one. I'll bring a couple. And I want to first, again, focus on the language of the Ishaki Tazria Ve'alda, this Tazria, this planting, this seed, this idea, imagery of seeds and trees, and right. And I want to circle us back to the original connection with the birth, with the birth and seeds and all that, with the whole sin of the tree of Etzadat, of tree of knowledge, right? So Chava eats from Etzadat, and her punishment, right, is part of her punishment is be'etzef til dibanim, that you will have pain associated with childbirth. And part of that pain, as we see, is not only a physical pain, but with her birthing her children, Cain and Hevel, that essentially brings mortality and death into the world by Cain murdering Hevel. So not only is the birthing experience a painful experience, but that also brought, in a sense, mortality into the world and brought this this challenge, right? This of in the balance of this, right? And the Yoledet is essentially something some opinions say that the Yoledet is bringing the Chatat as a general sin offering to atone for the prototypical mother, which is Chava, right? And if we look deeper in that for a second, where did this sin come from, right? What did the sin originate from? The sin originated from the blurring of lines between the material and the spiritual. And I think that that's something that happens, that blurring of lines between spiritual and material, and physical material, between every time a new life is born into the world, every time this new potential comes in, we have that balance again and a challenge again at the forefront of material and physical world. Another reason I think that for giving the Khatat, the Korban Khatat, is that a woman, they say, a woman will make an oath during childbirth because it's so painful, that because of the pain she's experiencing, she will never again be with her husband and never have more children. Now, this is a very strange reason to blanketly say that all women should be giving Korban Khatat, because yes, maybe some women might say that, but I don't know if all women will say that, right? And so what is the sin here? What is it really trying to show us? And I think that it's showing us that the process of childbirth is so intense that sometimes a woman might want to cut herself off, or not want to continue this godly side of her of creativity and cultivating life and being creative, and that part of ourselves that we have, that she might want to back away from it, right? And I think this is, the postpartum depression and anxiety that we get stuck within ourselves sometimes, unfortunately. And I think that is what the Khatat is trying to redeem and to correct, is to bring us back to that godly side of us if we get stuck in the physical because of the pains of birth. I think a way we could even understand this deeper is someone else in the Torah who brings a Korban Khatat that seems a little bit unnecessary or enigmatic about why they bring it, and that is the Nasir. The Nasir is someone who takes upon himself extra stringencies to back himself away from the physical world. He doesn't cut his hair. He doesn't drink wine. He makes sure he's not tamei lamet. He doesn't want anything to do with death. And then he makes this oath. And when he decides to end his yemei nezirut, right, to stop this oath and go back to being, regular and drinking wine and cutting his hair and acting like a, regular person, he has to bring a korban khatat. So again, there it's like, why did he bring this khatat? What is the reason? He didn't sin, right? He made an oath. He did this, and now he's finished with his oath. So again, there's a lot of interpretations of that, but I want to bring one that I think connects to the Yoledet. Is I think that the Nazir, when he is on this extremely when he takes this oath and he's on this level to God, where he's relinquishing some extra physicality to get himself to a more godly side, he's now re-entering his human side a little bit more into the balance, and there is a loss, right? So I think the same thing too with the woman here, that she was on such a high level of creativity and closeness with God, and now she's getting back more into her human state. So there is a loss, and so I think that's also that loss of godliness, even though it brings us back to a standard or base level of humanity. You're not doing anything wrong, but there was a level of godliness and connection that was taken away or lost at that point. Now, another thing I want to talk about is, through this whole process, it talks about the Yoledet, comparing her to the Nida period, right? Or the Tuma that a woman experiences post-menstruation, or during and post-menstruation, till she goes to the mikveh. And it keeps saying, right? It's a lot of similarities to her yemei nida. Now, why does it keep comparing it to the Nida, right? We know that it's not Nida, obviously, right? It's not menstruation. She's had baby. We know it's not that. So why does it keep bringing us up to connect to us to the idea of Nida? And if we look at it, Nida, like the Nad, Nida, right, the root comes from this word, this displacement, right, this separation that's associated with it. And in the time of the Mikdash, right, when a woman was Nida, she was unable to be involved go in the Mikdash or Mishkan. And, a lot of times in Asian cultures, the women would go to, they would have their separate tents, right? That they would have when they were Nida. This was, there was a level of separation between the women that were Nida and the women that weren't, the people that weren't. And even if we don't look at that from, a level of that on a localized, modern day level, right? A woman who's nida is separated from her husband. So again, like the yoledet, I want to point out, nida is not a bad state; it's a natural state. Yet this natural state will lead us to being separated, right, from the mikdash, which essentially is from God and from our spouse, right? From that relationship, we're separated on some level, right? So this, I think, is part of the strongest connection of why this all, hopefully to all tie this back, why this yoledet, this woman who gives birth, comes in at the same time of metzorah, of someone who has sarat, because the metzorah, on a very extreme level, is separated from the community. They have to be michutz lamachaneh, right? They have to be out of the, in quarantine, essentially. They can't be within the society. So they're experiencing an extreme level of displacement and loss until they're able to re-enter, right? They're not able to connect with society. So similar to, I think this feeling of separation and other is something that many new mothers will feel after birth. And, this is now, I mean, not so much now, but, not right now, but meaning recently, a lot of study and focus has been on this idea of what they call the fourth trimester, right? Women are pregnant for 3 trimesters, right? For 9 months, but just because the baby comes, there's still a level of healing and of your body still not back to its quote unquote regular state right after you have a baby, right? Anyone who's given birth knows that. So your body, the woman's body is in pain. You're not sleeping, you have a newborn, right? You, a lot of times, there is this level of separation that you might feel from you're not having a social life, like, you can't just go and do whatever you want and be part of things. We have a baby, your body's healing, all these things, right? And on another level, right, of separation, your body that nourished and created and cultivated this baby for 9 months, and where those months you felt the baby inside of you, you nourished the baby inside of you, it was literally connected, right? You're physically connected to them. And it's a beautiful thing that, please God, everyone has healthy births, right, and healthy babies, but it's still a level of separation, right? There's still this level of complete oneness that you had with this baby that was inside you. And now this separation that you and the baby are 2 entities, right? So even though it is, again, a very happy thing and everyone should be blessed with healthy babies, but there is a level of loss there sometimes that you feel that now there's this level of 2 where there was 1. And the goal of parenting, right, ideally, is to foster your child's independence and to help them become their own independent person. But it's not necessarily so easy, right? We see a lot of times the problems that develop when a child is too reliant on the parent and the parent is too demanding of a child filling a certain role and not letting them be their own individual. So this searching for oneness, right, that we feel, that I think the mother feels and essentially the child feels, right, on different levels, obviously, but that searching for one, it's something we see again at Briat HaOlam, the beginning of the world, when Chava, right, the first woman, was created literally out of the man, right, out of his bone, right? And then it says, when about marriage, it talks about right? The man has to leave his parents and become one with his spouse, right? So this oneness is not with your parents, but it's with your spouse, your partner. And I think, I'm not going to get so into this right now, but I'm just going to touch upon it a little bit. But you could see this is something that is extremely, discussed, very, very strongly discussed in psychology, right? How all the relationship with your parent is very formative, especially Freudian psychology and everything, all the connections he has with your mother, with, mother and parents and all these prototypical relationships that you have. This was something that, this, if anyone, studied any Greek mythology, the story of Oedipus, right? How that also discusses this whole challenge of just, other than mother and father and parents, and where's my place in that, and all these things, right? And I think that this is something that many people will struggle until adulthood. And unfortunately, people that don't have these positive relationships will have challenges with their parents and children, as they get older. And so I think, obviously this is my take on all this, but I think that the Tuma of a Yoledet and the Tara process she has to go through is essentially, in a way, a blessing to God, from God, how he's guiding her and the society of how to deal with this transition into motherhood, and how to balance this godliness and mortality that we're constantly juggling, and that comes to the forefront when you become a new parent. And in today's society, right, women don't really focus on this so much, right? Because we're told to, jump right back into society and act like nothing happened, and a huge physical and emotional thing just happened, right? And it's continuing to happen and heal throughout, those following months. And I think that the Tuman Tara process gives the woman that ability to digest that physically and mentally, right? To go through all that. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we're putting this women in this category to give them that space and that time, that yes, they're the other, but they're not the other in a negative way. They're the other in a way that we have to realize that they have to separate to reconnect, and separate to digest this experience, and then come back in to society with a new level of, or a different level, I don't say new level, maybe a different level of understanding of what this all means, and to them specifically, to the world. And I think that this is something that if someone has their first kid or their 100th kid, right, I think this is something that every time anew is experienced on some level or another. And again, I think this is something as women we should take into account, and give ourselves that grace in that fourth trimester. And I think also as a society is to realize that this emotional and physical turning point, so to speak, that this woman went through, and to not just pretend that it didn't exist and let's go back to regular life. No, this is something that needs to be processed, and yeah, so I think that this is something that is that we shouldn't be on Tara as a positive or negative thing. It's a state of being, and I think here this is something that's a very positive guideline of how to take this woman who had this had this child, and help her digest and deal with all that experience. So yeah, we'll talk more about the Mitzvah next week, and different levels of Tuman Tara. But I thought this was hopefully a little bit of a different take on all this Tuman Tara. I hope you enjoyed, and yes, hopefully we'll have a more quiet week, and everyone should stay safe. Thank you.